2,000 years ago, one man came closer to destroying the most powerful empire on Earth than anyone before or after him. He didn't have guns. He didn't have ships. He crossed the Alps in winter with war elephants, and Rome trembled at his name. You're watching Channel Name, where history comes alive. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because we cover the stories they never taught you in school. And trust us, this one might be the greatest military story ever told. Stay with us. Every single minute of this video is worth it. Around the 3rd century BC, the Mediterranean world was not a peaceful place. It was a battlefield waiting to happen. A region carved up between empires, city-states, and hungry republics, all pushing against each other for land, trade, and power. And sitting on two sides of that world were two forces that could not both survive. On one side stood Rome, not yet an empire, but a republic, with iron discipline, enormous ambition, and an army that kept growing with every passing decade. Rome had already swallowed most of the Italian peninsula. It was building roads, forging alliances, and training legions. Rome didn't just want to survive. Rome wanted everything. On the other side sat Carthage, a great North African city on the coast of what is today Tunisia. Carthage was ancient, wealthy, and proud. It controlled trade routes across the western Mediterranean. Its navy was the finest in the world. Its merchants were everywhere. Carthage had been a superpower long before Rome was anything more than a cluster of villages on 7 hills. These two powers had already collided once. The First Punic War, fought from 264 to 241 BC, ended in Roman victory after 23 years of brutal fighting, mostly at sea. Carthage was forced to hand over Sicily and pay Rome an enormous sum in war reparations. The humiliation was total, but it was the kind of humiliation that doesn't produce surrender. It produces rage, and one Carthaginian general carried that rage deeper than anyone else. His name was Hannibal Barca, and before he died fighting in Spain, he made his young son swear an oath before the gods, an oath of eternal hatred toward Rome. That son's name was Hannibal. The story of what happened next begins not on a battlefield, but at an altar. Hannibal was around 9 years old when he begged his father to take him along on the military campaign to Hispania, what we now call Spain. Hamilcar had been rebuilding Carthage's military strength there, training a new army, far from Rome's watchful eye. The plan was long. The vision was generational. Hamilcar agreed to take his son, but only after Hannibal swore before the gods to be Rome's enemy for as long as he lived. Hannibal swore, and he meant every word. He grew up in army camps, not palaces. He trained alongside soldiers. He learned tactics, terrain, languages, and leadership from the time he could walk. When Hamilcar was killed in battle in 228 BC, command passed to Hannibal's brother-in-law Hasdrubal, who continued building Carthaginian power in Spain. When Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BC, the army did something remarkable. The soldiers, the men who had watched Hannibal grow up among them, chose him as their commander by acclamation. He was 26 years old. Within 2 years of taking command, Hannibal had already proven himself. He ran brilliant campaigns across Spain, secured territory, won the absolute loyalty of his troops, and showed a military mind that moved faster and thought deeper than anything his opponents had seen. He was not a reckless general. He was a calculating one. Every move he made was part of something larger, and the largest move of all was coming. In 219 BC, Hannibal turned his army towards Saguntum. This was a city in eastern Spain that had placed itself under Roman protection. Attacking it was, in effect, a direct challenge to Rome. Rome sent ambassadors to warn Hannibal. Hannibal dismissed them and pressed the siege anyway. After 8 months of brutal fighting, Saguntum fell. Rome sent a formal delegation to Carthage demanding that Hannibal be handed over. Carthage refused. And just like that, the Second Punic War, the war that would nearly end Rome, had begun. Rome's plan was straightforward. They would send one army to Spain to deal with Hannibal directly, and another army to North Africa to threaten Carthage at home. They expected this war to look like the last one, a contest of navies, of coastlines, of supply routes across the sea. They were already thinking about where to land their ships. They were not thinking about the mountains. What Hannibal did next is one of the most audacious military maneuvers in the history of warfare. He marched his army overland from Spain, across the Pyrenees, through southern Gaul, and then, in the middle of winter, across the Alps into northern Italy. He brought with him roughly 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. The march through southern Gaul alone was a fight. Local Gallic tribes resisted. Rivers had to be crossed on makeshift rafts, supply lines stretched to dangerous lengths, but all of that was manageable compared to what came next. The Alps in November are not a tourist destination. They are a wall of rock and ice and death. The mountain passes are narrow, treacherous, and high. The cold at altitude reaches extremes that kill men who are not prepared. Snow covers the paths. Rocks fall. The footing disappears without warning. And Hannibal was trying to move an army of tens of thousands of soldiers, along with horses, supply wagons, and 37 African war elephants, through terrain that barely accommodated mountain goats. The losses were catastrophic. Men fell from cliff paths. Soldiers froze overnight. The elephants, terrified and struggling on the ice, became almost impossible to manage. Hostile mountain tribes ambushed the column repeatedly from the high ground, rolling boulders down onto Hannibal's men. Hannibal himself contracted a severe eye infection during the crossing and lost the sight in his right eye permanently. When the army finally descended into the Po Valley in northern Italy, the numbers told the story. He had started with around 90,000 men. He arrived in Italy with approximately 26,000. More than 60,000 soldiers had been consumed by the mountains, the cold, the ambushes, and attrition. By any logical military calculation, this army should have been finished before it fired a single arrow. But those 26,000 survivors were something different. They had walked through the worst the earth could offer and kept moving. They were hardened beyond what training alone could ever produce. And standing at the edge of Italy, looking down at the flat, rich farmland of the Po Valley, they were ready to fight. Rome had no army waiting for them. The first blow landed fast. At the Battle of Ticinus in late 218 BC, a Roman cavalry force under the consul Publius Cornelius Scipio met Hannibal's horsemen in a skirmish near the Ticino River. Rome lost. Scipio himself was severely wounded and, according to ancient accounts, was saved from death by his own teenage son, a boy who would one day grow up to be the only Roman general capable of beating Hannibal. But Ticinus was just the opening note. At the Battle of Trebia in December 218 BC, Hannibal demonstrated something Rome had not yet seen: the ability to make an enemy defeat itself. He sent a small cavalry force to taunt the Roman camp early on a freezing morning. The Roman commander, Sempronius, furious and impatient, ordered his army across the icy Trebia River before his men had eaten breakfast. The soldiers arrived on the other side, cold, wet, and exhausted. Hannibal's army was rested and fed. Carthaginian cavalry smashed the Roman flanks, while a hidden force of infantry and cavalry hit them from the rear. Rome lost nearly 20,000 men. Hannibal's losses were minimal. Then came Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, one of the most perfectly executed ambushes in recorded military history. Hannibal hid his entire army, all of it, in the foggy hillsides above a narrow valley road along the shore of Lake Trasimene in central Italy. When a Roman army of around 25,000 men under the consul Flaminius marched into the valley that morning, they walked straight into a trap that closed on all sides simultaneously. In approximately 3 hours, roughly 15,000 Romans were killed. Flaminius himself died in the fighting. Many survivors drowned trying to escape into the lake. Some ancient sources record that the fighting was so violent, men on the ground didn't even notice a significant earthquake that struck the region during the battle. 3 engagements, 3 complete Roman disasters. Hannibal was marching south through Italy, and Rome was bleeding badly. Then came August 2nd, 216 BC, the plains of Cannae in southeastern Italy. And this is where the story becomes something that military historians still talk about more than 2,000 years later. Rome decided that enough was enough. They raised the largest army the Republic had ever assembled, approximately 86,000 soldiers, 2 consuls in command, and a plan so simple it seemed impossible to fail. They would use their numbers. They would line up, push forward, and crush Hannibal's smaller force through sheer mass and weight. Hannibal had around 50,000 men. He was outnumbered nearly 2-1. He had a plan. Hannibal placed his weakest troops, Gauls and Spanish infantry, at the very center of his battle line, forming a slight bulge pushing toward the Romans. On both flanks, he positioned his best African heavy infantry. And on the wings, he placed his cavalry, which was vastly superior to Rome's horsemen. The battle began. The Roman legions pushed forward, exactly as expected. The Carthaginian center, those deliberately weak troops, began to give ground. Slowly at first, then more. The Romans pressed in harder, pouring soldiers into the gap, tightening their formation as they advanced. What had started as a battle line became a crowd. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers packed tighter and tighter together, pushing forward, certain they were winning. They were walking into a closing fist. As the Roman center pushed in, Hannibal's African infantry on both flanks stopped retreating and pivoted inward, curling around the sides of the Roman mass. At the same moment, Carthaginian cavalry routed the Roman horsemen on both wings, then swung completely around the back of the Roman army and closed the circle from behind. 86,000 Roman soldiers found themselves surrounded on every side, packed so tightly together that many could not even raise their swords. The slaughter lasted most of the day. Ancient sources record between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans dead by the time the sun set on Cannae. Among the dead were 80 Roman senators, 2 quaestors, 29 of the 48 military tribunes, and 1 of the 2 consuls. The other consul fled with a few thousand survivors. The tactical maneuver Hannibal executed that day, the double envelopment, is still studied at military academies around the world, including West Point. It remains, by the consensus of military historians, the most perfect tactical battle ever fought. After Cannae, Hannibal's general Hannibal reportedly told him, "March on Rome now, and you will be dining in the Roman capital within 5 days." Hannibal refused. His reasoning was not irrational. He had no siege equipment. Rome's walls were formidable. His army was far from home with no guaranteed resupply. And he believed that after such a catastrophic defeat, Rome's Italian allies would abandon the Republic and join Carthage. Several did. The wealthy city of Capua switched sides. Tarentum opened its gates. Parts of southern Italy moved toward Hannibal, but Rome itself did not break. The Senate voted to continue fighting. They refused all peace negotiations. They raised new legions from younger and younger men. They stripped the treasury. They freed slaves to fight. Rome did something that was, in its own way, as remarkable as anything Hannibal ever did on a battlefield. It simply refused to accept defeat. A new Roman strategy emerged under the general Quintus Fabius Maximus, who earned the nickname Cunctator, the delayer. Fabius refused to engage Hannibal in open battle. Instead, Roman forces followed, harassed, and cut off Carthaginian foraging parties. They attacked supply convoys. They retook allied cities one by one. They starved Hannibal of resources slowly and methodically. Hannibal was brilliant. But brilliance, without supply lines, without reinforcements, and without a navy, is eventually just brilliance in a shrinking box. Carthage failed to send meaningful reinforcements to Italy. In 207 BC, Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal led a fresh army over the Alps hoping to link up with Hannibal in central Italy. He was intercepted and killed at the Battle of the Metaurus River. Roman soldiers cut off Hasdrubal's head and threw it into Hannibal's camp. It was the moment Hannibal understood that the war's tide had turned completely. Meanwhile, the young Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio, the same boy who had witnessed his father nearly die at Ticinus, had transformed everything. He conquered Carthaginian Spain. He trained his legions using tactics he had studied directly from Hannibal's own methods. Then, in 204 BC, he did what nobody expected. He took the war to Africa. Carthage, suddenly threatened at home, recalled Hannibal from Italy. After 15 years of undefeated campaigning on Roman soil, 15 years during which he won nearly every battle he fought, Hannibal Barca finally left Italy. Not because Rome defeated him there, but because Carthage needed him back. The final meeting came in 202 BC at Zama, on the plains of North Africa. Hannibal versus Scipio, the greatest general of the ancient world against the man who had spent his entire career studying him. Before the battle, the two commanders met personally to discuss terms. No agreement was reached. The battle began. Scipio used Hannibal's own philosophy against him. When Hannibal launched his war elephants, Scipio had trained his men to open lanes in their formation and let the elephants pass harmlessly through. Then, Scipio's superior cavalry drove off the Carthaginian horsemen and swung behind Hannibal's army, the same movement Hannibal had used at Cannae. For the first and only time in his military career, Hannibal Barca was defeated in open battle. Carthage surrendered. The Second Punic War was over. Rome had won. What followed for Hannibal was an exile that lasted the rest of his life. Rome was not finished with him. Even in defeat, even as an aging statesman helping to reform Carthage's government, he terrified them. Roman pressure forced him out of Carthage. He fled east, serving as a military advisor and general for various Hellenistic kings who were willing to challenge Roman authority. Rome pursued him across decades and across the entire Mediterranean world. They pressured every ruler who sheltered him until the shelter always ran out. Finally, around 183 BC, cornered in Bithynia in northwestern Turkey with nowhere left to run and Roman envoys closing in, Hannibal drank poison he had carried for years in a ring on his finger. He was in his early 60s. His last recorded words, preserved by the Roman historian Livy, expressed contempt without self-pity. He said it was time to relieve the Romans of their long-standing anxiety, since they clearly could not bear the burden of waiting for one old man to die on his own. He had crossed the Alps in winter. He had destroyed Roman armies that outnumbered him 2-1. He had kept an undefeated army in enemy territory for 15 consecutive years. He had produced at Cannae a battle that military science still considers unmatched. He never conquered Rome, but he forced Rome to become harder, faster, and more ruthless than it had ever been. Some historians have argued that without Hannibal's war, Rome might never have developed the military and administrative machinery that eventually built the greatest empire the ancient world ever saw. Hannibal Barca set out to destroy Rome. Instead, without knowing it, he may have been the man who made it. If this story landed with you, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Subscribe if you haven't already, because next week we're going deep on another story history tried to bury. And drop a comment below. Who do you think was the greater military mind, Hannibal or Scipio? We read every single comment. See you in the next one.